Well, in other news, how about them Timberwolves? No, I'm just kidding.
Wait, what's happening?
I see, and so that's the thing. So our show notes, we got them right here. It says, update from John about Timberwolves.
Okay.
We don't really follow the Timberwolves enough to be able to accurately respond to this. So I'll tell people what I know, and then people are gonna put in the comments what actually happened.
I think they might be roasting us in the comments.
So the Timberwolves are in the conference finals. So not the final, but like the pre-final. There's 4 teams left competing for that. We previously defeated the Denver Nuggets. Now we are going against the Dallas Mavericks. Yeah, Dallas. I know that for sure. And our last game, we unfortunately lost. It was close. Didn't win it. But our next one is tonight, as of this recording, Friday. There's another one over the weekend. So if you're listening to this on Monday, you know far more about how we're doing than we do right now. But go Wolves. Go Naz Reid.
It's a big deal. Like, I've been feeling it. Like, I'm the type of guy, I grew up playing sports. I was a sports fanatic as a youth, but I stopped paying attention in my adulthood. So, I understand it. When I watch it, it's exciting. I respect it. But I don't pay attention. But, I heard all this hype about it. And Yoni came by and was like, yeah, it's like being a part of the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I should tap in, but I don't think I will. But I do want them to go all the way to the finals and win it.
The reason that I wanted to bring it up is because there's this new phrase going around, bring yo ass. I don't know if you've seen that.
No.
I'm telling Charles Barkley, you got to bring yo ass to Minnesota. And so, like, the Department of Transportation made a route of you can drive around Minnesota, and the cities spell out, bring yo ass.
Oh, my God.
The governor made a proclamation that the first letter of every sentence spelled, bring yo ass.
Are you serious?
And I think we should host an event where we encourage people from around the country to bring their cannabis here called Bring Your Gas.
Bring your gas.
Where we encourage people, bring your gassiest strain, come on down to Minnesota, try it out.
That should really happen, though.
I agree. So if you are an event organizer and want to help us with Bring Your Gas, but unfortunately with the rules today, we couldn't have people flying around the country with it. But perhaps in the future, people could bring your gas to
They
Minnesota.
could teleport.
They could. Yeah, it will just magically appear.
Immaculate conception.
It always has in the past.
Yeah,
So.
every day.
Well, so should we talk about cannabis news? We don't really have a ton of sports news that we can be
let's do it.
talking about. So we've got a couple different stories today. We're going to be looking at some local stories here in Minnesota, some prohibition creeping its way into our state yet again. We've got some news about some legislation both here in the state and federally. But first, I wanted to talk about a new study that came out recently that I think is pretty interesting.
What did you learn?
So for the first time, the number of Minnesotans that consume cannabis on a daily basis has surpassed the number of the number of Americans that consume alcohol on a daily basis.
What?
So we have more people smoking cannabis on a daily basis than we do having alcohol every day.
It makes sense. I mean, because it's by far the safest thing that you can do.
Absolutely.
In terms of ingesting a substance, mind-altering substance.
For sure. So there's an estimated 17.7 million people that reportedly use cannabis every single day across the country. Marcus, are you part of that 17?
Yes, I've been a part of that number for 25 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So
chronic smoking.
Oh, absolutely. And I was actually more surprised to see that there were 14.7 million people that drink on a daily basis.
Goddamn, that's unhealthy.
Yeah, like I actually, that was sort of a surprising statistic to me, but I'm happy to see that now people have sort of come out of the cannabis closet. You know, they're willing to accurately report in polls. Yeah, I am smoking cannabis, and yeah, I am using it on a daily basis, finding ways in my life to utilize this plant. Yeah, I just thought that was interesting.
I mean, if you think about everybody you know who's a cannabis consumer and you put them all in one room, you see that they represent like every walk of life.
100%.
And a lot of people that do it are the people who learn how to relax and who like to be creative and focused and heal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, like, it's a great thing.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's also interesting to note that 40% of cannabis users report using it either daily or near daily, so pretty much every single day, which is, I mean, not a majority, but definitely a pretty large chunk of our community uses cannabis not just, you know, once a month or maybe once a week, but finding ways maybe at nighttime, maybe in the morning, maybe throughout their day to use cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, people couldn't do this consciously and safely and responsibly. I think most people do. Even if you look at all the drug addiction research out there. Like only like 8 or 9% of cannabis consumers have what they would call a substance use disorder.
Totally.
With it. So like most people are, if they're doing it every day, they're still responsible people. They're like present.
Oh yeah.
They're probably calmer than the ones who don't smoke.
Right. I think it's also a testament to like the expanded access to cannabis.
Yeah, exactly.
Like we're having more legal states, but also we're having, you know, CBD trickle its way into people's markets, even in non-legal states. THCA, I know, is making its way around the country, whether it should be or not. We're finding products across states that don't have legal cannabis programs, but people have access to cannabis in a store, not to mention the entire legacy market.
Yeah, that's one of the best parts about it, besides in decriminalization, is it gives everybody safe legal access to it. Because if you think about it, in the legacy market, not everybody has a plug. Especially like older people or people in like less populated areas, they might not have anybody they can get it from. So having stores and having it legal, so because most people who didn't do it while it was illegal, it's because they're afraid of losing their job or their career a lot of times. So like, yeah, legalization is good. And we've known for so long that people often use cannabis as an alternative to like pharmaceuticals that'll fuck up their personality and organ, or like alcohol or drugs that can be more hazardous. So
100%.
It's a safer choice, and it's good for people to be free to do it.
Yeah. So shout out to cannabis consumers everywhere across the country. Thanks for making the safe choice and consuming cannabis.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so that's sort of the positive news. I wanted to put that at the beginning. I think it's pretty cool. We've got sort of a positivity sandwich. So I've got another story that I think is pretty good news that we're putting at the end. But I'll be honest, we got some pretty bad news to get through.
Okay.
The first one.
You like to do good news first?
Yeah. So
but you said you did a sandwich. So
positivity sandwich is what we call it in special ed, where it's like hey, you know, you worked really hard on that project. You misspelled every single word, but it was really awesome seeing how you did that. You know, it's like the fun.
That's brilliant, because you're like you're handling people's morale with kindness.
For sure. People don't like to be attacked right at the beginning.
Yeah.
They like to be left with sort of a positive taste in their mouth at the end. So you just sort of do it. So that little behind the scenes of both classroom instruction and the writing of our script.
How to be unabusive in your criticism.
Yeah, we gotta be excited at the beginning. And now let's talk about some prohibition. So police have seized illegal products in St. Cloud, and it was a pretty big seizure. Now we want to sort of break down a little bit about what happened. So there's a shop in St. Cloud, Smoke and Cloud, which, I mean, pretty good name for a St. Cloud smoke shop.
And Cloud, yeah.
Yeah, I looked them up on TikTok. They have a bunch of videos of their store. It's pretty large. It looks like they have a huge supply of tobacco products, cigars, all that stuff, but also a pretty large supply of cannabis products.
Wow.
So the police came in along with the city and state departments of health under a warrant after they had received a number of complaints about illegal product. They looked through and found, a decent amount of illegal product. We were talking about this before we went on, but they referenced the amount that they found as 32 pounds. And you would sort of expect it to say like of flour or something afterwards. But no, it's 32 pounds of illegal gummies. So they're still sticking with the weigh-in everything. And
that's just
using
dumb,
that as the main method. But yeah, so they went there. They found gummies that were between 35 to 120 times the legal limit. So definitely pretty above the legal limit. For those doing the math, that's 600 milligrams per serving is what those gummies were allegedly attesting to. So pretty high dose. Now, we want to say this is all just alleged, right? They haven't yet been convicted. There's been no charges filed, but they did seize a large amount of gummies. They seized what police said was a significant amount of cannabis flower, likely THCA, but we're just speculating about that. That was a pretty big bust out of a legal shop.
Those cops should be so proud of themselves for keeping the streets of St. Cloud safe.
Mm-hmm. God forbid we have THC gummies getting
32 pounds. God, I don't even know how high that can get you.
Mm-hmm. And we want to say, like, this is the Minnesota Cannabis College. We support compliance. We want people to follow the law. But we're not trying to say, like, that we should be joking about this necessarily. But it is ridiculous seeing police efforts put so heavily into ensuring that we don't have cannabis products with too much THC versus X, Y, and Z else that they could be dealing with. This was a warrant. Like,
yeah, that's crazy.
It's insane that we saw state, local, all coming together to come into this shop to say, hey, man, those gummies look a little strong.
They should have just called the OCM, the Office of Cannabis Management. Couldn't you imagine how expensive that visit to the store was?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they spent thousands of dollars to do that. They could have just called it OCM.
Absolutely. Yeah, so
Jeepers creepers.
more to come out of that. There is allegedly also lots of other merchandise is the term they use that's embargoed right now. So we'll see sort of what comes out of this story. But a pretty large bust as we move into seeing how applications might be rolled out for the next chapter of legalization.
It seems like the smoke shops and the gas station type energy with cannabis products is the shadiest part of the bricks and mortar marketplace.
Oh, yeah, I think so. And there's definitely been, we don't need to sugarcoat this, like a lot of businesses that were openly being non-compliant.
Yeah.
And if this business really was selling 600 milligram gummies per gummy, not like per container, but per gummy, I mean, that is pretty up there in terms of dosage. And
that's going to be an unpleasant experience.
Yeah. Well, and like, not that should we have people going to jail for selling cannabis? No, of course not. But should we have people selling cannabis products potentially to unknown people for 600 milligrams? I don't know.
No, that is unsafe.
Yeah.
That's unsafe. Like, I'm like, they should be checked because that's reckless.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So more to come out of that one in the future. But for anyone in St. Cloud, if you've been going to Smoking Cloud to get your cannabis products, you might need to find a new place to go.
I can't wait until like the real dispensaries are open.
Right. It's going to really be, I mean, thinking about how much it's going to change our community here in the state. Like, I've never been in a state that's transferred to legalization. I've seen as like the Minnesotan looking through the window, like, man, they're sure having a lot of fun over there. But I'm excited to like have stores that have been dilapidated and run down and not have business in them suddenly be filled with this new industry that's been here for a while, but now being accepted and being able to be brought out and being able to go in and buy such a large variety of products. It's going to be really, I just think, such a large thing for us as consumers.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I mean, we're seeing, this is an emerging legal cannabis industry, but imagine what it'll be like in 5-10 years as the local market matures,
Oh, yeah.
It's going to get to the point where we want it, I mean, where we just got such a great selection of, variety of products. Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
So people are going to be able to find what they want. In the beginning, it may be hard, because all of these producers are going to be struggling to meet the market demand and get their operations well developed so they can, produce the best products. And I think most of these companies they might produce subpar products. So yeah, the future is brighter.
Only goes up.
Stumbling into it in the beginning, but it'll be good.
Yeah.
I'm high as hell, so excuse my rambling.
No, that was such a great positivity sandwich. I feel so good now. We talked about something positive, something a little negative, but hey, look, we're back to the positives. Well, one other thing I want to talk about. So this happened just like a little bit earlier today. So we're still sort of figuring out exactly what this means. But we had a new amendment added onto the Farm Bill, so the federal Farm Bill. So we're talking about news not out of St. Paul this time, but out of Washington.
Yeah.
The Farm Bill back in 2018 is really what sort of created our industry. For those that listened to episode 1 of our podcast, you can listen to Mason talk about hearing the passage of that bill and thinking like, well, this means business. And now we're seeing some of those rules that were put in place potentially being rolled back in the newest version of the Farm Bill. So let's talk a little bit about what this would mean. Essentially, what it would say is that cannabinoids that are synthesized or manufactured outside of the plant no longer fall under the definition of legal hemp. So thinking about Delta 8, thinking about hemp-derived Delta 9 that's synthesized, not naturally extracted, but processed with CBD, that stuff would potentially no longer be allowed federally in the United States. It's a pretty big change. Think about today where we have, THC products that are low potency, so hemp-derived, being sent across the country. People are able to order all of that. This would say no more to that.
So it's basically a huge step back.
Huge step back. We in Minnesota would have like this bubble of protection where under state law, it would be hemp. We would be allowed to process it. We would be allowed to use it. But we've had Minnesota brands that have sold to other states, I tried an Oliphant beverage the other day, super good, sold here in Minnesota, but made in Wisconsin. Those would no longer really be allowed to be sent over here. It could be a huge kneecap to this industry that has really developed over the last couple of years.
I mean, the thing about federal prohibition is that with adult use cannabis, as you know, you can only like make the products within the state and sell them in the state. You cannot have interstate trade, because it's illegal federally. But this hemp bill with the hemp-derived products, those companies can sell to multiple states. And like if the market is restricted just within the state, that limits companies that might have the capacity to grow, because they can't make enough money. So like if a company's in Minnesota and they're producing these hemp-derived products and selling them in 50 states, if they have to shut it down to just Minnesota, like there's going to be a lot of lost jobs and
100%.
Could be the death of a business.
Yeah. Places like Minnesota, Florida, they have those state programs in place. Those would be pretty protected, at least in like the bubble of their state. But we've had, a lot of states in the south part of our region have had some pretty developed cannabis industries that have built up. I'm thinking of states like Texas that have these huge cannabis industries that I'm not sure of the state protections that have been passed as of yet. And if there are none and this passes, there are no protections for them.
See.
Yeah.
The thing is, eventually federal legalization will happen, but it might not be for a decade or more.
Absolutely.
So, like, when that time comes, eventually interstate products with, traditional cannabis will be able to be sold. So, we'll be able to get imported weed. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I know. So, it's like we've been taking these sort of half steps forward for decades.
Yeah.
This is definitely would be a pretty big step back. I agree with you. Once we get to legalization, once we can send federally across the country, I'm predicting a future where maybe hemp-derived is something that is less important to the cannabis community once you can send full THC cannabis derived across state lines. But for right now, it could mean people in Wisconsin would lose access to cannabis, at least under this legal bubble.
I think it's terrible. And it's also, like, what I'm trying to also allude to is that, like, these companies that are now doing this interstate trade with the hemp-derived edibles, they'll have enough experience by the time federal legalization comes that we'll be able to have producers who can send products to states that may not be very productive,
Yeah.
So, like, to have companies that have that experience will be helpful.
Yeah.
So, like, this prevents them from developing that experience and that capital, those skills.
Now, here's one of those things that has been sort of disappointing as an industry to watch. I remember when states like Ohio were looking at legalizing a couple years ago, there being cannabis companies fighting for not allowing home grow in the bill, saying, we sort of need it to be safe, so it has to be through our regulated industry, which of course is absurd, but seeing sort of the cannabis industry turn against itself. And what we're seeing here is that the U.S. Cannabis Council, a council of legal adult use cannabis companies in states like Colorado, Michigan, so on, is actually supporting this measure, saying, we do think hemp should be an agricultural product, grown for fiber, grown for seed. Cannabis, grown for edible products, grown for tinctures, topicals, smokables, whatever, should be only through a regulated market. Sort of having MSOs look at hemp programs and say, it's okay if it goes away.
That's bogus. The thing is, when you got big money involved with any industry, they're always going to try to eliminate the competition among small businesses, like really small businesses, micro businesses. They don't care about, and some of the early states set it up that said only big companies could survive, especially even in like California in terms of the production side. So, it's big money always tries to kill the small guy in any industry.
Yeah, it's been disappointing, but I agree with you, not necessarily surprising.
Yeah.
So more to come on this. Now, the one thing that we do want to throw on there, and this is pretty big asterisk to throw in at the end, this passed in the House. The House is controlled by Republicans.
Yeah.
The same bill has to go through the Senate, which is controlled by Democrats.
Okay.
The odds that we see a Democratic-controlled Senate move this amendment through, I think is low.
Yeah.
But is possible.
Yeah.
So I think it's something, the reason we didn't put it at like the way beginning of like fire, red alert, like you definitely have to call people, is because I'm hoping that the Senate will look at this and say, no, we can't have thousands of jobs just swiped away because we think it should go through a different type of regulation. I hope that we see the hemp programs that were created be allowed to continue to stay. But I guess you guys, the viewers, probably know more than we do at this time, and hopefully we'll know more next week.
Well, hopefully the U.S. Senate kills that bill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've not yet released their version, so more to come from them.
Yeah, we need to stop the prohibition.
Stop the prohibition. I agree with you. Well, we're going to take a short break here. When we get back, we're going to talk about a new bill signed by the governor early today that has changed in our cannabis program. We're going to talk about what it means for you all. So we'll be right back.
Excited.
All right, and we're back. So in this part, we want to talk a little bit about a bill that was signed earlier today into law, but that was passed as House File 4757. Now, when you listened to our episode last week, it had just sort of made its way out of committee. The committee report was released. We talked about sort of some of the things that it contained. And then since we've last spoken, it has passed the House and the Senate. You know, the final passage was pretty interesting to watch. Marcus, did you stream it at all?
No.
Yeah, no worries.
I slept through it.
It's the grinding of the gears of government. But the last couple of hours of our legislative session was pretty chaotic. It involved a lot of shouting. It involved a lot of people yelling that the rules weren't being followed. And it involved the DFL sort of throwing their weight, saying, nah, we're the majority. You've talked long enough. We can have the votes that we need, and we're going to shut down you talking. And
that's so good because the Republicans are ruthless if they have the majority.
So when it came up, it was brought up in the Senate. Bobby Joe Champion called the previous question, which is a motion that ends debate and just calls it straight to a vote. And the Republicans were pissed, and they shouted for like 30 minutes about how angry they were that like they were using this procedure. People stood up and said, never in my 14 years have I ever seen this type of motion made in the legislature. And it was ridiculous. And then, of course, they passed the bill. They passed a bunch of other bills. And here we are now on the other side with our new cannabis law. Now, I mentioned that it was signed into law, and lucky we were again. It actually happened right before our podcast recorded. So I was able to sort of go on Twitter, see some of the news about that. It's now been signed into law. So here we are. House File 4757 is now law here in Minnesota.
Hey, let's go.
So what we're going to talk through is basically what this means for consumers, what it means for medical patients, and then also what it means for prospective business owners. Should we jump in?
Let's go.
All right. So we're going to be running through a couple different things. A big one is that they sort of reviewed what it meant to be a social equity applicant here in Minnesota. Now, previously, there were a couple open provisions. You know, if you've been impacted by the war on drugs by having a conviction, if a family member had, there were a couple rules that they were looking at, perhaps allowing women-owned businesses to be included in that. We talked about that on 2 episodes ago. Well, the final rules allow for all military veterans, regardless if they've been discharged for cannabis. It allows emerging farmers, which is now defined as those that for at least 3 years have provided the majority of a farm's labor and management and have made only between $5,000 and $100,000. So I got a friend of ours, one of the people that actually helped us start up the college way back in the day. Do you remember Jake Jarecki?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he was on a bunch of board meetings with us. He runs Feed Me Farms. He's been a farmer for the last few years, has been running sort of this small local farm in Minnetonka. He would qualify now as a social equity applicant as an emerging farmer under that bill.
That's great.
It also defined now those residents of high poverty areas where the median family income is less than 80% of the statewide, and then also a couple other rules, perhaps looking at like SNAP benefits. So really sort of we're seeing that definition of social equity applicant, which is going to be really important in just a couple of months, be clearly hammered out. And people are figuring out if they fall under that and how they fall under that. So we haven't yet seen like a map come out from the Office of Cannabis Management on these are the areas that fall under that.
Yeah.
I think we're all sort of waiting for what are they going to be included in that? What statistics specifically are they looking at? And excited to see more information on that. But at least now we know that's going to be a social equity applicant for the first round of licenses.
Yeah, I think it's good. I don't know. I don't feel like it's inclusive enough, but it's a good start.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. We talked on a previous episode about how there's a number of people that have been harmed by the war on drugs that just don't have a conviction, but have been pulled out of their car, perhaps searched, perhaps had things seized from them, perhaps X, Y, and Z that just aren't social equity applicants.
Lost their jobs.
100%. Yeah, I can think of so many people that have been impacted by cannabis prohibition without having a conviction.
Exactly. I mean, I've been abused extremely.
For sure.
Yeah, no arrest, though.
Well, and we've talked about in a previous episode that, I mean, you and I are both sort of waiting to see that map to see if, do you qualify under that definition? Because the idea of what a social equity applicant, in my mind, includes Marcus Harkis. Does it in the mind of the legislature? I guess more to come.
That's funny because so many people assume I'm a social equity applicant. Like, I may not qualify.
Yeah. We'll have to keep watching.
That's okay. I'm still going to get in and win it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're still going to be in the market.
Yeah.
So there was talk at the beginning of the legislative session that a social equity applicant status is sort of meaningless if all it does is get you a couple more points in the application process and then nothing else. So what we saw introduced is an early head start for those that are social equity applicants for getting pre-approval on their bill, on their application. We've talked about this a little bit in the past where it's not going to be allowing them to start their business up and running and doing all the stuff they need to be able to sell cannabis. It's going to allow them to get local approval, to get a lease, to, sort of go through the hoops that you need to start up a business, giving them a little bit of a head start on working with local regulators to get their businesses opened.
I think this is great, because in terms of like accessing commercial resale space, if people don't already have like a history of renting commercial spaces, a lot of commercial landlords are going to be looking at people sideways. So like to have this pre-approval and to contact them and say, yeah, I'm going to get a license for sure.
Yeah.
It helps people to raise their money and to get their commercial space and, plan to build up get their team together and get their infrastructure.
Well, and there was a lot of talk during the legislative session about we need people to be able to start growing. Like if we want stores to open early part of next year, we got to have product grown in the state for people to be able to sell. And what's exciting is that social equity applicants, at least those that qualify under micro, meso, and cultivator, will be given early access once rules are put in place to be able to start growing products. So now we're not only seeing social equity applicants get early pre-approval, which is very helpful, but also perhaps getting a head start on being able to sell in the market as well.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's good.
Yeah, it's really been, I mean, nobody likes the legislative session. Nobody likes just like watching bills become laws, but it is cool seeing our program come together in a way that, I mean, a decade ago, we would have said, hey, that's pretty cool. I'm glad we're doing that.
Wait, I'm confused though. People are not excited by the legislative session? To me, that's more exciting than watching the Timberwolves in the semifinals.
Well, I mean, you and the Bulls. That's fair. All right. Well, so moving right along, the next thing that we're going to talk about is they put some limits in place on those application numbers. We had talked about, will they go with the House numbers that were a little higher, the Senate numbers that were a little lower? They went with the House numbers. So we're going to be seeing caps, at least for the first couple of years, put in place on those licenses. And then after that, the office will be able to sort of make some adjustments. But exciting now seeing all those rules that we had sort of waited to come together now coming together.
What are the limit numbers?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't have them in front of me right now. But we had talked about them on that previous episode. So if you want to check that out, go back to our last episode. We got all those numbers. I'll put a link in this show notes that like links to that information. So
cool. I vaguely remember the numbers. So they didn't change from that?
No, they went with the higher numbers on that, which is exciting.
The House
they opted not to go with reserving for med. They're just going to have businesses be businesses.
Good. That's smart.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that.
I mean, I really think Minnesota will. I mean, we've been championing for us to do better than every other state anyway. So I think ultimately we are going to have one of the better state markets.
Yeah, I definitely think we're getting close. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
So we're going to see applications no later than July 24th. We're going to see those applications closing no later than August 12th.
Wow, that made my heart leap.
I know, man. Like really soon, we're going to see this application process up and running soon.
Yeah. Shout out to OCM.
Absolutely.
Getting it done.
Getting it done. So more to come on exactly sort of what those applications look like, what exactly needs to be included. There are certain things in the legislation, like, safety plan, employee training plan, things like that. But what the actual application looks like, I'm excited to see more.
Okay, let's go.
Let's talk about municipal cannabis stores for a minute, because that's something that has been sort of going back and forth for the last couple of months on what exactly are those going to look like, how will they affect caps. And I think it landed in a place that I'm pretty happy with. So municipal stores will not have to go through the lottery process. So they sort of get a head start on being able to get their license. If, we've talked about a couple cities in the past, if they want to open a municipal store, they don't have to worry about not getting a license for that necessarily. The office can still cap it if they believe the city has too many, but I don't think we're going to be seeing that. So municipalities sort of have this easy way to get it, but also we were concerned about municipalities, counties having like a municipal cannabis dispensary, and then that being the one required business, and then being able to lock out the rest of the industry.
Yeah, I don't like that.
Now, municipal stores don't apply to that cap. So they can have a municipal, but they also have to allow at least one other private business.
So the municipal doesn't
count.
Okay, cool.
I think it's a pretty good compromise. Like,
it is.
Do I like the idea of Wyzetta or whoever being able to get a dispensary license without having to jump through the hoops? I'm not super thrilled with it. But do I like that they won't be able to lock out the market in Meeker County or wherever? Yeah, I think that's a pretty good compromise. I'll take it.
I wonder how many cities have like experience with doing social enterprises, like municipal liquor stores.
Yeah.
I wonder, that would probably give us an indication of the number that might try to get a municipal cannabis dispensary.
I was sort of shocked to learn how common municipal liquor stores are throughout sort of more the rural part of the state. I'm a city boy, born and raised, and so didn't really have a lot of opportunities, but would drive out to like Silver Lake, Minnesota, where Grounded Gardens used to be based. Shout out Grounded Gardens and Bridget and the whole crew there. And just going to town and there being the municipal liquor store, and that's the liquor store.
Yeah.
We'll be seeing stuff with cannabis as well, but also private business.
Yes. It's kind of seems weird. It'll take me a few years to wrap my head around.
Yeah, we'll definitely need to.
City of Minneapolis cannabis dispensary.
Yeah, perhaps.
Hopefully
possible.
not. No.
Yeah. Oh man, what would that look? No. We'll come back to that later. So let's talk about some hemp changes. So there were a couple of rules that were introduced in the early part of the session. Here are the ones that were introduced. So THC beverages no longer required to be in the can if they're being served at like a restaurant or bar. They can have them on tap. You can be served a cup. You can have that be your serving. Businesses are required to post information if they are serving it outside the can. We're also seeing increased allowed of cannabinoids in those products. So there were some caps that were going to go in place around CBN we were pretty concerned about.
Right.
Don't have to be as concerned about that. Now at least sort of the caps were raised to 25 milligrams per serving of CBG, CBN, CBC, and CBD. And then 0.5 milligrams of all other cannabinoids. So at least allowing more types of cannabinoids, still not all of them, and still sort of weird to be nitpicking, but
it seems silly, like writing in your report that you see 32 pounds of gummies.
Yeah. I don't disagree with
choices.
And then the last part, the stuff that I wanted to sort of save for the end, is we've had some reforms around what it looks like to be a medical patient here in Minnesota. Now, previously, if you wanted to be a medical patient, you had to have a condition that qualified under like that list of qualified conditions. Now, if your doctor says your life or your condition can be improved by cannabis, they can write you a prescription and you can be a medical patient. It's no longer a decision between your doctor and your senator and you. It's now just between you and your doctor.
It sounds so crazy to have a senator involved in a medical decision.
But it's how it was. Like we had states like California where if your doctor said you should be a medical patient, then you were, and that's it. And that's sort of all that there was to it. Here in Minnesota, it was up to the state to determine what actually does cannabis help. Now they've removed that. So your doctor will be the final choice on that, which I think is pretty exciting.
It's only taken 150 years to come back to the way it used to be when it was legal in a lot of medications.
100%.
It was in the U.S. Pharmacopoeia.
I know, right?
In the 1800s.
It was It's been here for a long time.
Yeah.
We also saw a change that previously we had medical cultivator, processor, and retailer licenses. So you'd have businesses that were doing sort of the same thing as adult use, but just strictly medical. That was now removed. So we still have that combination license where you can do, your medical cannabis stuff, but we're also going to see people being able to use medical cannabis endorsements to be able to sell cannabis as medical cannabis out of their adult use store. So if you have, for example, let's say the Dabbler Depot becomes an adult use dispensary. Someone over the age of 21 could come in and buy their product. If they had someone on site that was a trained expert in what does medical cannabis look like, they would be allowed to be able to sell to a medical cannabis patient. So I think it's a better change. Instead of us having medical stores and adult use stores, we're going to have cannabis stores, some that specialize in allowing medical patients and some that just sell adult use cannabis.
So will the purpose be to have like a pharmacist on site who can give a consultation?
Yeah. So in essence, they'd want people who come through that medical market to still be able to have someone who's like an expert that they can talk to about how that impacts them. But if they're just trying to buy adult use cannabis, they don't have to do that. So it's allowing them to buy cannabis perhaps at higher dosages without tax, a number of different benefits. But you have to go through a store that has this endorsement, and there has to be a pharmacist you're working with to get your product.
Okay. I mean, I respect that.
Yeah.
I was on the path to becoming a pharmacist in my mid-20s.
Yeah.
Till I got fired.
Well, and what's nice is that it actually wouldn't require a fully trained pharmacist. It would require someone with an endorsement from the state. So
I respect that.
We don't know exactly what that looks like yet. It could be pharmacists, registered nurses, whatever. It could just be someone that's trained in what does medical cannabis look like. Yeah.
I mean, even in whatever, the most basic of dispensaries, it's really helpful for the consumer to have staff that have some basic knowledge or at least can point to educational resources to help these consumers to understand, what's what and what works best for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really think it's sort of a holistic approach to cannabis is cannabis.
Yeah.
If people want someone they can talk to help them through the medical side, let's provide that. But if people just want to buy cannabis, just let them buy cannabis.
Yeah, because most people who've done it for a long time know what's what and what's best for them. And
oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. One of the first questions they ask, so I've talked about this before. I'm a med patient here in Minnesota. When I had my initial consultation, one of the first questions they asked you is, so have you used cannabis before? Yep. All right, what works for you? This does. Okay, cool. I might recommend trying this, but here you go. It's really I think this is a good move forward for people. And then the final thing is we saw the registry program get updated. Now, we talked about this on a couple past episodes, but if you're a medical patient, you want to be able to grow medical cannabis, you maybe have an ability, a condition that doesn't allow you to grow yourself, you would be able to have a caregiver be able to grow on your behalf. So up to 8 plants they would be able to grow for you. They'd also be able to grow 8 plants for their personal self, so up to 16 plants for a caregiver. And they'd be able to provide that cannabis to the patient. Now, there weren't rules written in about would they be able to sell it, get anything in return. Still no rules around that, so it leans on the side of no. But at least we're seeing perhaps more growing being allowed here in the state. Definitely a step forward. Definitely more work needs to continue to be done. But, I mean, shout out to Kayla for getting that done at all.
Yes, Kayla,
just really cool seeing that definition of caregiver really be expanded to, I think, how we as a community understand it, not just how the state understands it.
So the caregivers will have to register?
Yeah, so they still have to register with the Department of Health with that patient. A caregiver can have no more than 6 patients, but they actually can only grow on behalf of 1 patient. So they're sort of capped on what they're allowed to do. But let's say you have an elderly mother who's in the medical cannabis program. You would like to provide her access to cheap cannabis. You'd be able to, as a caregiver, grow for her, give her that cannabis. It's, like I said, a step in the right direction. Obviously not far enough. It's very kneecapped from what Kayla introduced, but still, I think a good step.
Yeah, it's progress. And I'm excited to see the number of people who register to do that, because this is just going to contribute to the skill development in our state. Yeah. We're ultimately going to have thousands of people in the state who can produce good cannabis. Yeah. Imagine how good you'll be in 20 years. I mean, you're going to have cannabis at home that can rival anything in the store.
Yeah. No, I'm really excited for just seeing more expansion around what does cannabis look like.
Yes, I'm loving it.
Mm-hmm.